In today's video, I'm going to show you how to make some concrete countertops. We're going to take you all the way from the start to the finish. Let's go. Alright, I'm pretty happy with that for the first pass on this concrete countertop. Now let's just run through how we got here. Once I got my cabinets installed, I installed a 1/2 inch plywood on the top. I sealed that plywood with exterior varathane so that no water could later on absorb, say like in the crack, or soak through the concrete and rot the plywood. Now, right here at the front where IKEA has the metal little clip, I didn't attach the plywood there. I slid the metal angle iron underneath, which I think is super clever. This should have no honeycomb, should have a perfect finish. You guys saw how much I tapped it down. And I think I've poured the perfect mix. I followed the instructions, got it a little bit wetter. Again, I'm using PSI 6000 concrete. This took 3 bags. I've got my sink form here, all able to release from the inside. And the reason I'm making this video is I haven't seen any concrete countertop videos where they do an undermount sink. And one funny thing my wife says to me after we watched like 20 videos on YouTube, says, how come everybody is always pouring concrete all over the floor? So anyways, just here to show you that you don't really need to pour all the concrete on the floor. You do your prep to make sure little crumbs don't fall on your finished floor, but seriously, this steel edge is a lifesaver. Now, I'll let this cure for a couple days. I'm going back home, and once that's done, it might shrink back a tiny little bit, and this steel form, once I release the screws that are up into the cabinetry or up into the plywood, this steel form should pop right off. And then these ones here I should be able to release from the inside. So I'm gonna let this set up for about half an hour or so, get you guys back in while I do the finishing. But you saw how much I tapped the front, should be looking good. And I tapped all the way around this sink, so fingers crossed that we got a nice finish. We also are going to go through the whole process of staining and sealing the concrete countertop. This is a white stain over gray with 1 primer coat and 2 finish coats of concrete countertop sealer in matte finish. Now let's get started. Here I'm using an 1.5 inch conduit to make a sleeve for where the faucet will go through the countertop instead of drilling a hole after, which may crack the countertop. Quick look at the undermount sink. I've got it cut through and attached with 4 wafer screws to hold it in position. And my steel edge is tucked underneath the plywood but above the cabinets, that 1.25 inches away from the plywood all the way down, and I'm just going to seal off these ends with some plywood. I'm using 4 evenly cut pieces of 2-inch angle, self-tapping a screw in each corner. Then I will square up the entire form and lock it down with 1 extra self-tapping screw so that it can't move back out of square. To close off the end, I'm using a piece of 3/4 inch plywood. It's not a big deal about the appearance on the end. I've got a gable coming down from the upper cabinets to the lower, so it will be unseen after I'm done my project. I'm wiping everything down and getting ready to silicone all the cracks and set the faucet hole with the 1.5 inch conduit pipe. I used a black metal flashing at the back to prevent concrete from flowing over. You don't need that if you have drywall. Once I've elevated the pipe, I'm going to put a bead of silicone to hold it in place while I pour. I will also run a bead of silicone around the sink, all along the back edge of the form, and basically anywhere that I see a crack that the water or concrete could leak through. This is going to minimize a lot of mess that could potentially happen with the liquid seeping through the area. I definitely suggest using small beads in areas where you're going to remove the form afterward. I've got my sink form wrapped with tuck tape. Now I'm marking
the location that I will stick it down to the undermount sink. I'm using 2 strips of Gorilla 2-sided tape to flush up the metal because there's a slight difference in height because of the way that I lapped the steel together. Interesting thing about pouring against the tuck tape is that it did leave a better finish than the raw steel that I left across the front. I may or may not in future pours use tuck tape across the front edge as well. Use the indicator lines on the sink to set the form perfectly. Now I'm going to weigh it down with some tile so that I can silicone around the perimeter, locking it into that permanent position so that it can't be moved when I pour the concrete. Do very small beads in this location so that they're not seen in your concrete when you take your forms out. I've got both ends all closed off and everything is sealed and ready to go. It's looking nice and straight. Just got one more step to do before I can pour the concrete, and that's set an elevation line across the back so I know the height to pour to. I'm using some painter's tape to go across the back. Then I'm going to use my 4-foot level to level off the front form to elevate the tape to the perfect height. If you've got drywall back there, go ahead and just use a pencil line, but make sure you don't lose your pencil line when you pour, which means pour too high and then it might not be seen. When we do large pours for like garage slabs, sometimes we'll put nails all the way around as the elevated height so that if you lose the line, the finisher can touch down with the trowel and feel that the nails are there, and then he pops the nails out before the finishing process. So you could use like little tiny nails just so you don't lose your line. We are ready to go here. We've got the elevation line all taped up for the height and it's looking really good. Time to mix up the concrete. I'm using the 6,000 PSI concrete. I've mixed in an extra liter, so I'm using 3 liters of water per bag. This helps with the consistency so that I can tap it and hopefully get a nice finish across the form. One thing about adding the water to the concrete is I may have reduced the strength of the concrete a little bit, but I'm not too worried about that because I'm pouring at about 1.5 inches in the minimum everywhere, and I've supported the concrete really well with the 2x4 across the front, and everything else is weighing down on the gables and the cabinet edges, so I didn't feel the need to add any rebar or mesh because of the strength of the concrete, and I don't suspect any future cracks will show up. One thing you got to keep an eye out for is shrinkage cracks. Sometimes if you cure concrete too fast, it will actually shrink and crack itself. So once your pour is finished, keep your slab moist for like the first day or two. That will reduce the chances of shrinkage. This is my first pass at the concrete with the steel trowel. You can see I'm leveled off perfectly and I'm really pushing the aggregate down. Here's kind of a look after 2 passes. I've got a really nice flatness look to it. Still a few trowel lines visible that I will work out afterward. I need the concrete to stiffen up a little bit more. And I'm going for like a rustic kind of look, like an old piece of concrete when it's done. If you're looking for like fine, perfect look, you might want to use a mag trowel to push the aggregate down so that you're dealing with more of the cream. And you can see I looked for like a little bit rougher, then added some water so that I could get some character in the top of the piece when it dries. And the stain definitely took different in those areas. After 7 days, I will remove the formwork and see how I did on the pour. The steel edge came out really easy, even around the sink. And I've got a little bit of honeycombing here across the front. So let's take a really close look at that and see what we're gonna do.
So here was the reel, and you can see I've got some honeycombing across the front here. So I have to try some different techniques when I do the other side. And inside the sink, it looks a lot better. So I think the concrete was better against the plastic that was on the tuck tape compared to the plastic, or compared to just the raw metal that was here.
This is the material I'm going to use to patch and repair the honeycombing. I definitely recommend this product. It dries really fast and it's really easy to put on. But the most important part is it's a really direct color match to the PSI 6000 concrete. On the next day, here I am mixing up another batch of the patch material, just in a small container.
The first coat of patch went really well, but it shrunk back a little bit, so I just want to make sure that I'm super flushed up. If I'm gonna patch, I'm gonna make sure it's flush. So I'm going a second time, and then tomorrow, once it's all dry, I'm going to put the white stain down.
After letting the patch dry, here I am using some sanding paper just to clean up edges, round them off a little bit. This is where you can get really creative with your finished look. I've used wire brushes in the past to get a little character to the concrete. You can sand corners down to the aggregate, which is also looking really nice. It's kind of an artistic thing, so you just kind of like get your sample going and make sure that you remember exactly how you got to your sample, and then proceed with the reel. Time to stain the concrete. Here's my Eco Stain in white, already diluted with water, so it needs to be shaken up and put into my sprayer. Eco Stain has so many different colors. We fell in love with the white over gray and figured it had a really nice, like, older looking patina to it. And I suggest using one of these applicator sprayers. It's kind of like the old form oil cans where you pump it up and it pressurizes itself. With staining, you're trying to get a color that you're happy with. So I just saturated the entire surface with spray and then used a brush afterward to kind of even it all out. Then I proceeded with using a tile sponge to kind of swirl it out to get my achieved look. And here's my final look. I've got some gray definitely coming through, and those extra trowel lines are coming through as well. Now I'll wait one full day to let the stain really set in before I start the concrete sealer.
Alright, so I'm mixing up for primer coat on the countertop. I'm going to use 2 parts of this and 3 parts of this, mix it for 3 minutes, then let it set for 10. After it's set for 10, I'm to mix in 7 parts of water. Now that's the perfect primer material to put down the first coat. After I let the first coat wait for 4 hours, then I'll mix the second coat, which is the same process, 2 to 3, but much less water, 2 parts water. So I'll see you in like 10 minutes to mix in the 7 parts water. Then we'll head up to the countertop and I'm gonna use my foam roller to dispense this sealer all over the countertop. 7 parts water.
This is a penetrating sealer, so on prime coat, make sure you use a lot of it and keep adding it until the concrete doesn't take any more in. So as we watch here, you can see some of the spots are darkening on the countertop, which is the concrete soaking up the primer. And that's what you want. You want this penetrating sealer to get down into the surface so that not only on the top is it sealed, but in the top layer it's got a lot of sealer. So this primer is a little more diluted, easier to roll on, so be careful as you apply it. And you're looking for like all the bubbles to be gone before you stop and let it set for the 4 hours. After 4 hours, the surface should be dry and tack free. So it's time to mix up the first coat. Same idea with the first coat. Put on as much product as you can that you see getting absorbed into the concrete and roll it out until there's no bubbles or roller lines. It's looking really nice and even and full. And after I'm done rolling this on, you've got to wait again another up to 4 hours to get the sealer to dry.
Alright, so that was first coat after primer, and I mixed up a half batch, so half part one, 1.5 of the other, and then 1 part water. So that was the perfect amount for this size countertop. When I made the primer, I had way too much extra. Like I made 1 full order, but it was probably enough to do 10 times this countertop. So don't waste your material. Take it from me, you could at least half or third that initial primer coat because there's so much water diluting it. And you can see here I just worked out every roller line and I got no bubbles. So I'm gonna let this dry until it's tack free and mix up the third coat. Or sorry, mix up the second coat, the final coat. Alright, so I'm mixing up the final batch here, the final coat, second coat. I'm mixing a half ratio, so 1 of these to 1.5 of these. Alright, so I'm going to mix for 3 minutes, then let sit for 10. Then I'm supposed to mix in my clean water to 2 parts, but because I halved the recipe, it's only going to be 1 part of water. So it gets tricky, but make sure you follow the directions perfectly. See you in 10 minutes. I'm just looking to squash down the bubbles right now, so there's no bubbles in the finish. But the second coat took a little less this time, and I really floated on good. So I'm really liking this.
Wow, here's the final look. 2 coats of sealer on top of a coat of primer, matte finish. This turned out great, and the material cost for the concrete was like $36, and the sealer was like $250, but I'm able to do 100 square feet with the product, so brings this countertop to about the cost of $50. Wow, what a great budget price for some hard surface countertops.